I hope all of you like the film, a very important and a landmark film of all times. We are very fortunate to have the director of the film, the great Shyam Benegal with us. It is not an easy, it is rather a rare and a lifetime opportunity to hear about this film from the director himself. And who else than Shri Shyam Benegal? Sir, we welcome you.
Good morning. Well, there is a kind of background to this film. Uh, when South Africa, the apartheid movement disappeared, and we recognized, that is, India recognized the or rather the post-apartheid South Africa. And when we recognized the country, at that time, it was felt by our government that we should make some kind of film, film which would help in getting our relationships much closer. Because one of the things was that we had a huge South African Indian population. Because over the or almost a century, we had people going there or being sent there as indentured labor. And that's how actually Mahatma Gandhi himself, when he went, he went there in order to find some kind of employment for himself, because he went from Kathiawar. And when he went there, he found that the condition of the Indians there was dreadful. And that started him on his journey, which eventually made him into the father of our nation. And the one of the things was that it was the beginning of his consciousness, his political consciousness, his social consciousness, his understanding of human relationships, his understanding of racism, all these many ideas that worked. All of this put together. Now, all that came and made sense to him when he went to South Africa. And when he went there, of course, when he joined as an apprentice in a law firm that belonged to somebody, a friend of his uncle or cousin or somebody, I can't recollect now. But the important thing was that when he went there, he was absolutely shattered when it hit him personally, when he was thrown out of a train, because he had moved and he paid for a first class ticket and went into the first class cabin, but he was not allowed there. He was physically thrown out by the authorities, the rail authorities themselves. So that's, when he suddenly realized the horror of the apartheid business, because that was the beginning of his whole career, which eventually led him to become the greatest leader of our country, of our time as well. So this was a story that was waiting to be told. And when I was invited to South Africa as soon as the apartheid disappeared. And when I went there, they were thinking, the government of India and the new government of South Africa were thinking of making a co-production, a film, essentially about Nelson Mandela. But when I was offered that film, I said, but how can I make a film on Nelson Mandela? I don't know anything about him. And except that he is the father of the new nation of South Africa. But beyond that, it would be very ridiculous for me to think that I can make a good film about this great man. So I mentioned that both to our authorities as well as to the South African authorities. And I said, instead of that, why don't I make a film on young Gandhi? Because young Gandhi did two things. He became a political person when he was in South Africa, for one thing. And secondly, the means the weapon he used to get India, to make India free was a weapon he experimented with in South Africa, which was that of satyagraha. And that was a very, very important thing to work out because, it's something that nowhere else in the world had happened, that you have a non-violent weapon. You're working on the basic conscience, of humanity, and the ideal of humanitarian ideals on that basis. And that's how, the whole story of Gandhi begins. So, and that happened in South Africa. And so that was the story I thought should be told, because very few people in India even knew at that time that young Gandhi had spent a lot of his time, many years as a matter of fact, over 20 years in South Africa. And so that was the thing that I wanted to do, because there was a film already made on Gandhi by Richard Attenborough, but there wasn't a film about Gandhi, no story about young Gandhi himself. And so at that time, we decided that we were going to do this film. And I went to South Africa for a recce trip. I met President Nelson Mandela. But one of the interesting things about when I met him to talk about this particular film, he spoke to me. He said, strangely, he said, the person who really got me politically involved, who was the inspiration for me, was not so much Gandhi as much as Nehru. And that absolutely floored me, because I never realized that even Nehru had such an incredible influence on the South African freedom movement. So the ANC, of which Nelson Mandela was the leader, that itself, of course, had its origins in the NIC, which is the Natal Indian Congress, which was started by a group of people who were both South African, native South Africans as well as the Indian settlers there. So it's altogether a fascinating story, and I think my two young protagonists, Rajat Kapoor playing young Gandhi and Pallavi Joshi playing young Kasturba, were absolute genuine finds because they gave a great performance. And I remember when we had the premiere in South Africa, both in Durban as well as in Johannesburg, with the fact that Nelson Mandela was so pleased with their performances. So he invited us all for breakfast to his home in Johannesburg, in actually Pretoria, which is the official capital of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these wonderful opening remarks, Shyamji. Some really interesting stories also coming about. And I would just like to ask you, as a director, I don't think it's a simple yes or no question, but were you satisfied with the end result that you had in what kind of other stories maybe you would have liked to show? Because of course, the Mahatma has such a vast experience in those 20 years. Do you think there were some other stories you might have wanted to show which you weren't able to because of some limitations?
Well, I can't, I couldn't follow the question. Unfortunately, my setup here is so basic that I can't really hear you too well. Okay. So there's nothing I can do.
Repeat.
And
repeat the question.
Well, perhaps it might help if you repeated the question.
Yeah, maybe Yashwantji could repeat the question. I think you could hear him a little clearer in the trial. Hello? Yashwantji, I think you are on mute. Yashwantji, you are on mute.
Are you happy with the end?
Hello. Yeah. Sir, I'm repeating the question. The question is that it was Gandhi, even in Africa, is a huge subject, and it is very difficult for anybody to contain such a big thing in a cinema. or a 2.5 hour thing. So do you think there were more stories you would have liked? Have you had an option to tell more, or you are happy with whatever is there in that movie?
Well, I had chosen to tell the story of Gandhi in South Africa. No more. Because, the moment he left South Africa and came to India, that's where the film Gandhi begins, actually. The monumental work of Richard Attenborough of Gandhi actually begins, the real story of Gandhi begins when he comes to India, because that's where he found his, and here he became the father of our nation, and the entire freedom movement, he took over the reins of the freedom movement, and he led the country to victory on the principle of satyagraha and non-violence, which he discovered for himself when he was in South Africa. So South Africa played a very important part, in the whole business. So actually, India also, as soon as apartheid was abolished and there was a popularly elected government in South Africa, the first country to recognize South Africa was India.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think it's a little unfortunate that Shyamji isn't able to hear me directly since I had the flow of questions with me. I will keep requesting Yashwantji to convey the questions to Shyamji so that he can hear us clearly. Yashwantji, the second thing I would just like you to convey to Shyamji is the kind of resources, the literature that he would have had to go through, especially on Kasturba, because her life isn't that well documented. What kind of resources were he able to find? If you could ask him about it.
Sir, the question is, I repeat, sir, the question is that you might have gone through a lot of research and collection of scriptures, documents, books, and whatever. It is very understandable. But as because there is not much of literature available on the character or details of Kasturba Gandhi. So, would you like to address that?
Well, you see, there's a lot of material. There's hardly any material on young Gandhi in India. There wasn't. Now, of course, the Gandhi archives are absolutely marvelous because we have practically everything that we would like to know about him in India itself. But there was in South Africa, in their archives, there was certain material that I couldn't possibly locate in India. And when I went to South Africa, when we were researching the film, we went to their archives and then found a whole load of material, which is very interesting, fascinating. And that was something that became very an important source material for us, particularly relating to the sort of environment of South Africa at the time, which, of course, sitting in Bombay, one wouldn't have known.
I'm asking about Kasturba.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And anything about Kasturba Gandhi? What records could you find? Did you find enough references of Kasturba Gandhi for the movie, or you had to recreate a lot of things?
Well, there's a lot of about her in Gujarati, and Kasturba herself had spoken about it a great deal. And when they were, because she was a woman in her own, extraordinarily independent-minded woman. And although she followed her husband all the time, but she was a very tough lady. She wasn't, she wasn't the kind of submissive wife. She was his strong right arm, and that was what made them such a power couple. It was quite an extraordinary combination. While when he was there, she would be very quiet. But left to her own, she was absolutely, she knew what her mind was, what she should do, and so on and so forth. Because, while Gandhi was out, doing everything for the whole world, she was doing a great deal for the home, not just her own home, but for whole lot of people. So she was quite an extraordinary person. So I think some aspect of that we brought into our film. Because she contributed a great deal to making Gandhi the Mahatma that he became.
Yes, sir.
Yashwanji, the next question that we had in mind, which I would like you to convey to Shyamji, is about how, and it's very interesting that we come to know that this was also somewhat of a government initiative, but it never glorifies the Mahatma as a god. It shows very real human moments, his failures, maybe as a family man. And if you could just comment on how he took this decision of ensuring that these flaws also came to light in this movie, even though maybe might have been also a government initiative, so there might have been different factors at play. Still, this humanizing aspect of the movie of Gandhi, if you could just comment on that. Big question.
Sir, I'll repeat the
Yes, I
question.
can't follow what
No.
I will repeat the question, sir. The question is that, when you made a film about Gandhi in South Africa, although it was a very beautiful thing, nobody else other than you would have thought about such a niche where such great films like The Great Salt March or The Gandhi was already made. So in that thing, for an Indian, Gandhi is such a big image that is there. How could you keep him as a human? Normally, one would end when one wants to tell a story about somebody. Somebody would end making him a god or something like supernatural thing. But you have maintained the weaknesses also what a human would have, and very nicely treated and put him as a human only.
Well, that was the whole point of it. The whole point of making the film was to see him in a human dimension. When he becomes a Mahatma, he sort of transcends everything, and you forget that he was a human being. And one of the things was that he had all the problems and foibles of most human beings have. What was the one weapon that he had that made him completely, transcend everything? Was his kind of experiments with truth. As you know, he wrote his own autobiography, which he called My Experiments with Truth. Now, the fact is that he had made up his mind that he would be truthful, absolutely truthful to himself and to the world around him. It's a kind of thing which is almost impossible for people to handle, individually. But he had such an extraordinary capability, and he was such a hugely capable person that he had the strength of will that perhaps nobody else among the public leaders that we know had and have even today. Nobody, because that was what made Gandhi the Mahatma, his enormous strength of will. He had a strong will. He was absolutely born honest, not with the whole world only, but with himself. Before he tried anything, any one of his experiments with anybody else, before that he would do it. He was the laboratory where he would try it out on himself first.
Yes, sir. I ask a question over here. So, the kind of studies what you have and the great amount of work you already had before making of this film, were you a follower or a believer in Gandhi before you made the film, or it was just a subject or even if you were a follower, was it because you appreciated Gandhi, or it was just an object the way you would have done any other film? I'm talking whether you had some special affinity for the character or for the story you were doing for the making of the Mahatma.
Well, I wouldn't call myself a Gandhian in the sense that most people consider Gandhians. Because it was like he is the father of our nation, so he's sort of in some ways above us. In the sense that you don't see him as a human being. You see him as a transcendent being, and you sort of say that you consider him to be much more perfect than all of us. So naturally, the question does not even arise that you're looking at him as somebody you can follow. This was the big problem, because although Gandhi himself was the kind of person who had all the foibles and the problems of other human beings. But when somebody says you are a Gandhian, it means that you have to follow the precepts of Gandhi, which are not always easy to follow. He's a very difficult man to follow. So there are people who have been able to do that to a large extent, but it also calls, for a kind of what's the word? You have to become, you have to submerge your ego considerably to be able to function very much the way he would like you to function, or rather, his principles dictate. Doesn't happen. I mean, we all have our egos. We all want to have our individualities and so on and so forth. So it's not always easy. But there are many, many ideas of Gandhi that continue to be relevant, continue to be important in life. And one of the most important ones, of course, as you know, is nonviolence. And nonviolence, in the way he preached nonviolence, it may have been a little extreme, but even then, he was not the kind of person who would say nonviolent under all conditions, all circumstances. He may have said, it's like Jesus Christ. He would turn the other cheek if he was slapped on one, turn the other cheek. But this is much more than that. We are talking about somebody who would, of course, stand for humanity and the principles of humanity under any circumstance. Now, it's something that's not terribly easy to follow, but it certainly is a great ideal to have.
Sir, you have handled Gandhi later in Bharat Ek Khoj also. There was you covered the next part of Gandhi in that movie, wherein you used a different actor. And although it has the limitation of a TV series, would you like to say something, the relation or no relation on as to how should we look at these two films coming from you on this more or less the same subject?
Who you're talking about?
Bharat Ek Khoj.
And Gandhi came.
Yes.
The episode called "And Gandhi Came."
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that one was based on a book, which was a marvelous book, which was a novel written in the 1930s about a little village in Karnataka, actually. And that's what I did, because, it was a question of him, not necessarily as an individual, as an idea. When you say "and Gandhi came," you're talking about the idea that the ideas that Gandhi brought to the country, which eventually led to our freedom, and also led to the whole ethical framework on which our own constitution has been written.
Right. So it was a great film, even watching Bharat Ek Khoj overall, not just the Gandhi part, but the whole thing for the later generation, the generation after the film, treat all these two works as the basic document. Like suppose somebody who has not gone very deep into the history will treat Bharat Ek Khoj made by you, that the TV series, and making of the Mahatma as the basic document to get a brief understanding of things. Sir, I would like to ask another question. You have a history. You were the beginners of the new wave cinema, if you allow me to call it like that, and the movies like Ankur, Manthan, Mandi. And you introduced all new actors and actresses like Sadhu Meher came, Nasruddin Shah, Om Puri, Amrish Puri, Shabana Azmi, Smita Patil. Everybody came through your films. And you did not continue with them for very long periods of time. Would you like to tell me as to Were you keeping away from the stars or the stereotypical images of artists, or were there some other reasons for that? Always using new artists from NST and FTI and wherever.
Well, you see, the audiovisual media, the forms change so dramatically over a period of time. Cinema, as I knew it, no longer exists. It's today all media sort of converge. One goes into another quite easily, and then the whole manner in which people watch films is also so different. It's no longer the way that it was an occasion. You bought tickets to the cinema, you went there, watched a thing in a darkened hall with so many other people around you. All that kind of an experience of the cinema no longer exists. So that, the cinema that created a kind of larger than life image, particularly of the kind of stories you told and stuff like that, all that has gone. Because today, much of our material we get is either on television or even on your cell phones. So you see the dimension that separated you from what you saw, that has disappeared. So you can't even, it has had a tremendous kind of impact on the kind of material you now use to tell your stories. You cannot make those epic type of things. If you're doing that, then you do it as a series, as a television series, not as a film. So the whole experience of audiovisual media has changed over a period of time, as it must, because the new technology is coming in. The whole experience, they offer you different aspects. So everything doesn't come from one source now. It comes from multiple sources. And all of us get our, the audiovisual media communications from so many different sources, even for entertainment.
Asking about why.
Sir, here,
Yes,
sir, I would like to ask you another question here, which is about a little different film, but a beautiful phenomenon. It is about your film Manthan. Manthan is learned to be produced by the farmers of Gujarat. Probably it was a crowdfunding, what we call today, that day. And it also is a film in between a documentary and a feature film. Would you like to tell about that, how the 5 lakh farmers became the producer of a film, sir? And how the success when the truckloads of farmers started coming to the theater halls to see the movie?
Well, you see, I must give the credit largely to Dr. V. Kurian, who was head of Amul at that time, and also later on became chairman of Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation. And he eventually, from Delhi, the entire dairy industry is kind of father of the Indian dairy industry. Now, he was very keen to make a film about the Amul experience, about not the entire Gujarat experience, but Anand, where the milk revolution actually began, where Amul is located. And so he wanted to make a film about that experience. So, but what happened was that he actually thought that perhaps we should make a documentary. But we'd already made a couple of documentaries by that time. And so I thought, why not make a feature film? To tell the experience, not so much as a documentary, but as a story, as something that people would get involved in, not something that you're telling from the outside, but where they become part of the process. And and that can only be done with a feature film. But he said, well, I can't get farmers to pay for something like that. So I said, well, let's see how you can do it. So he came up with the idea that since milk it was a cooperative. These were dairy cooperatives. He said he would send a message to each one of the people, dairy farmers, who supplied the milk to Amul, twice a day, every day, that they should, if they would allow the Amul not to pay them for one time, whether in the morning or the evening, the money that they would get for the milk that they supplied. And they all eventually agreed. And having agreed, we put together that money and made the film. So, so it was, in fact, in reality, it was produced by all those 500,000 farmers. And that's how we managed to make the film. And the odd part of it is, as you well know, as everybody knows, the fact is that the initial audience for the film were the same farmers, which meant that not only did they finance the film, they also made it viable once the film was made. And it started to run into profit already.
Thank you, sir.
Just like to say something here, and then Yashwant to Shyamji, if is unable to hear me. It's quite amazing actually how today, when even other filmmakers, say for instance, maybe sometimes documentary filmmakers, are struggling for funds, and this phenomenon is an amazing example of how one can go ahead in cinematography. And one other thing of the mind of making of the Mahatma, similar to the issues of rights, is that about how Mahatma Gandhi also started as a labor rights activist in some sense, talking about the rights of the laborers, and especially in which daily wage laborers are free. Of this person struggled so hard to make sure the issues were important. Would you like to say something about the present context? If Yashwantji could please convey this question.
Sir, I repeat the question. The question is that in the present context that the labor issues that is going on, it also seems that Gandhiji was a labor activist. He had issues related to labor raised in South Africa also. Would you like to put these two things in perspective, or the story as to whatever you prefer?
Of course, because, Gandhi was concerned with a lot of things. He was concerned with all the problems relating to capital, labor, a lot. But his solution to the problem was not a confrontational one. He always worked on the basis of consensual the solutions. So basically, if you go by the Gandhian principles, then you must find a solution that is consensual, that is acceptable, largely acceptable, let us say, to both parties, both confronting parties. So, the whole labor and capital relationship was based on that kind of consensuality, which means that you had to function. The idea was that you had to make it non-exploitative. That was the whole thinking as far as he was concerned. But the fact is that the world is not always that perfect, and although it is a perfect ideal even today, but there will always be a point to look forward to where you can solve problems through consensual means.
Yeah, and that is actually very important, I think, what you just said about what we must work towards, and that is really what the Mahatma showed us. One other thing that I had in my mind was the kind of music that you might have had to use in the making of this film, especially because of the people it was appealing to and the people it was portraying. The struggles of these people you were portraying in the movie had to resonate with the kind of music that you use. It could not, the two had to go together. Could you please comment on that? Yashwantji.
Sir, the question is about the music of the making of the Mahatma. The question is that the movie is very sensitive. How could you make it that the music somehow supports the storytelling rather than being something else? And also, in addition, I would also like to talk about your take on music in your films. You have mostly used one music director for a very long time, except one or two exceptions like A.R. Rahman and all. Would you like to tell about the music in your films and especially the making of the Mahatma?
Well, you see, music, as far as I'm concerned, music is part of a film. Whether you use it in the form of songs, whether you use it as background scores, but it has to be actually a part of film, like actors are part of a film, the story is part of the film, all this kind of thing. Music has to be integral. If there is no need for music, it cannot be integral. There's no point in using it. Now, as far as music used in making of the Mahatma is concerned, we had this score that worked out by Varad Bhatia. We recorded the music. In fact, the music was recorded by an orchestra in South Africa. You know, and some parts of it were done in Bombay, but some parts of it were done in South Africa. And then, of course, the last song of the film, which is really it's a kind of anthem. It was the ANC's song, which was in one of the South African languages, and it was sung brilliantly by this girl whose name why do I forget her age now? I've forgotten her, but she sang it so beautifully.
Sir, as because now we are talking about music and craftsmanship of your movie, sir, I would like to bring another film here, Suraj Ka Satwaं Ghoda. Why I'm bringing here is that the two actors of this movie have acted in that film also. Rajit Kapoor and Pallavi Joshi feature in that film. And the beauty of that movie is the time and space that is created. That the sense of time and space over the 7 stories that happen in that movie. Sir, where does this concept of time and space, the way it is there in the movie, of course, it's a very delicate treatment. Would like to know whether it came from the original book by Dhanbir Bharti or it was a creation of you.
Well, you see, when the story was written, as you know, it was written, when you write, it's very easy to go backwards and forwards. You can tell stories within stories, all these kind of things. But film is unfortunately not a medium that allows you, the words are different. When you write, you can do a lot of things because half of everything that is there, the meaning is given by you, or rather, you complement what you have read with your own imagination and your understanding of it. But when it comes to film, it's already concretized. So there is when you shoot somebody, if a person photograph somebody, that person is already there. When you say sunset, you can actually see a sunset. But when you use the word, it was a beautiful sunset, each one of us has a different way, to see a different sunset. That kind of thing. So the fact is that Suraj Ka Satwaं Ghoda was a series of stories, cyclical stories, one within the other, and so on and so forth. So to find some kind of an ability to get the subjectivities out, to understand the subjectivities, that was the attempt. I don't know whether we succeeded or not, but it worked itself out well at that time. And certainly the people who saw it, many of them were not as confused I thought that they would become by seeing the film. But they did. I mean, the film actually worked quite well because clearly it had a fairly good run when it was released. And then, of course, it went on television several times.
So coming back to the making of the Mahatma, you have a huge body of work wherein you have done documentaries, ad films, these kind of things, and feature films and TV series, and everything possible. You have done a lot of biographical films. The making of the Mahatma Gandhi is also one of them. You have done two movies on Nehru also. Would you like to tell me that what makes you turn towards so many biographical stories, biopics, what we call?
Well, it's very fascinating to make a biographical film. You want to get into that person because you make biographical films about people in many cases, people whose work you have admired or who as human beings you have admired or you consider have done a great deal to the society around them or their, to the future of their country or whatever. I mean,
Kind of impact do you think it has had on the younger people, especially even now, when we try to screen this film for lots and lots of students across the country? And what is the kind of message that you hope is getting across to these students this week? Could you please convey that, Yash?
Yeah, I mean, it is an inquiry saying that what message, as because we keep showing these movies to lot many young people, even at present, what message would you like to go through, or what message you'd like to share with them?
but I mean, it's already there in the film. I mean, it's nothing that I'm. I don't have to invent any message. The fact is that when it comes to Gandhi, his message lives forever. It continues to be there. So it's just simply kind of bringing back into the forefront. When you make a film about somebody like Gandhi, if you just to bring the ideas back into the forefront, which we keep somewhere in the back of our mind, although it's very much part of our experience. So I think there's nothing that I mean, there's no new ideas that I'm projecting. It is those ideas which are perennial, because even Gandhi's ideas were there before Gandhi. But he crystallized those ideas in a context. I think that's what we should learn, because our thing is we have to look at it in our own individual contexts, and that's what the eventual learning is all about.
Thank you so much, Shyamji. I think it's 8 on my clock, and we have another session at 12, so we'll have to end here. Yasminji, I would like you to formally thank sir, and then we will move to the next session, please.
Sir,
Thank you.
it is a matter of great honor and pleasure to be talking the greatest filmmaker of our times. We are really happy and we are really thankful for the support you have always extended to SPIC MACAY. We are thankful for the films you have made, and we are thankful for the talk you gave. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.